How my mother's obsession with my brother ruined my childhood and nearly broke me. The following months were a journey of healing, albeit a slow one. Lily and her mother began to rebuild their relationship, not by pretending that everything was the same as it had been, but by learning to live with the changes. They still missed her father, but now there was an understanding that they could move forward together, even if that meant finding new ways to honor his memory. Lily began to speak up more, voicing her feelings instead of bottling them up. She still struggled with the changes in her family, but she had learned that healing wasn't linear. There were good days and bad days, and that was okay. With time, she began to find her own voice, not just in her relationship with her mother, but in her life as a whole. She started to take more initiative in her own world. She joined a new club at school, something she had always been too shy to try before. She started writing in a journal, pouring her thoughts and feelings onto the pages as a way to process the emotions she had buried for so long. And while she still had moments of sadness and anger, she was learning to accept herself for who she was. Someone who was grieving, yes, but also someone who was growing and finding strength in unexpected places. Her relationship with Richard, though still awkward at times, began to shift as well. He tried harder, not just as a stepfather, but as someone who wanted to be a part of her life, even if that meant taking things slowly. They didn't become close overnight, but there were small moments, shared smiles, a joke or two, that made Lily realize that maybe, just maybe, this new family of hers had a place for her after all. And in the midst of it all, Lily found a glimmer of hope. It wasn't the same as it had been when her father was alive, but she was learning that life didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. She could carry her father's memory with her while still finding joy in the present. In time, Lily would learn that family wasn't defined by the past, but by the choices they made in the present. And while her heart would always carry the weight of her loss, she was no longer afraid to live her life, to move forward, and to embrace the love that came with it, even if it was different from what she had once known. Lily's journey was far from over, but she had learned something valuable. Healing was possible, even in the most broken of hearts. Her mother, though scared by the past, was beginning to find her own way back to happiness. Together, they had found their footing again. And though there would always be difficult moments, times when the pain of loss would resurface, Lily now knew that she could survive. She had the strength to move forward, to rebuild, and to embrace the love that she had in her life. Richard and Tommy, too, were slowly becoming a part of her world. They weren't her father and brother, but they were people she could trust. And maybe that was enough for now. The road ahead would be long, but Lily was no longer afraid of walking it. Her relationship with Richard continued to fray. No matter how hard he tried, she couldn't bring herself to trust him. Every time he spoke to her, his voice felt foreign, as though he was a stranger trying too hard to be a part of her life. Her mother, on the other hand, was lost in her own struggles, trying to balance the demands of the household while grappling with her grief and the stress of raising two children, one of whom was not biologically hers. "Can we talk, honey?" her mother asked one evening after dinner. Lily didn't want to talk. The words felt like too much to bear, but she knew her mother was trying to bridge the gap. So, reluctantly, she sat down at the kitchen table, her eyes focused on the cup of tea in front of her. "I know things have been difficult," her mother began, her voice soft and hesitant. "I know you feel like I've been distant, but I want you to know that I love you. You're my daughter, and nothing will ever change that." Lily didn't respond immediately. Her mother's words felt comforting, but they didn't erase the weight she carried. "Then why does it feel like everything is about Tommy? You always focus on him. He's not even my family." Her voice cracked at the last part. Her mother's face tightened. "Lily, I understand that it's hard. But Tommy is going through a lot too. You know, he lost his father, and his mother isn't always around. He needs extra support, and I'm trying to be there for him. That doesn't mean I love you any less." Lily shook her head, the frustration bubbling up again. "You don't get it. It's not just about Tommy. It's about everything. You're not the same anymore. You're not my mom anymore." Her mother fell silent, tears welling up in her eyes. It was clear that Lily's words had struck a chord, but Lily didn't feel sorry. She needed her mother to understand the depth of her pain. But the more she tried to make her see, the more it seemed like they were worlds apart. For the first time in a long while, Lily wanted to scream. But instead, she stood up and walked out of the room, the overwhelming emotions too much to handle. She slammed the door to her room behind her and collapsed onto her bed. She didn't want to feel this way. She didn't want to be angry at her mother. But in that moment, it felt like the only emotion that made sense. The next few days were filled with an uncomfortable quietness. Her mother still tried to reach out, but Lily refused to respond. She retreated further into herself, feeling more alienated with every passing hour. Tommy, blissfully unaware of the tension, carried on with his usual antics, but Lily couldn't find it in herself to even look at him. It was a Saturday when Lily's life would take another unexpected turn. Her mother sat her down in the living room, her face more serious than usual. "Lily, I think it's time we talk about something important," she said, her voice steady. "I want you to understand why things have been the way they are. And I hope we can find a way to heal as a family." Lily's heart raced. Was her mother finally going to acknowledge the distance between them? Or was this another attempt to placate her? She wasn't sure, but she couldn't bring herself to say no. "What is it?" she asked, her voice guarded. Her mother looked at her with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. And I realize that I've been so focused on trying to fix things with Tommy and with Richard that I haven't been the mom you need. I'm sorry, Lily. I've been so lost in my own grief that I failed to see how much you've been hurting." Lily's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this. Her mother's words, though painful, were also a balm. For the first time in so long, Lily felt like someone truly understood her. But the tears that had been threatening to fall finally broke free, and she felt a release she didn't know she needed. "I miss him, Mom," Lily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I miss Dad. And I don't know how to live without him. It feels like no one even remembers him anymore." Her mother reached out and hugged her tightly. "I remember him, Lily. I always will. And I'm sorry if it feels like I've forgotten him. But I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." They sat in silence for a long time, holding each other, both of them grieving in their own ways, but finally acknowledging the pain they had been carrying separately. "Hey, Lily," he said one night as they all sat at the dinner table. "How about we go for a walk after dinner? It might be fun." Lily looked up from her plate, but instead of responding, she simply nodded and returned her gaze to her food. Her mother smiled at Richard, a quiet warmth in her eyes. But Lily saw it. How her mother would look at him with that soft expression, one she hadn't given to anyone since her father's passing. And it stung. Richard wasn't her father. He couldn't be. Soon Richard began staying over more often. At first, Lily resisted the changes, clinging to the routines that had been a part of her life when her father was still around. But as the months wore on, Lily found herself pushed to the side. The time that had once been dedicated to her was now divided between Richard and her mother, leaving her feeling more like an intruder in her own home. When Tommy, Richard's son from his previous marriage, came to stay with them for a few weeks during the summer, Lily's world was once again shaken. Tommy was younger than her, but his presence seemed to dominate everything. He had a loud, boisterous personality that filled the house, leaving Lily feeling like an afterthought. Richard and her mother spent hours entertaining Tommy's every need, while Lily was left in the background. As the years passed, Lily's resentment toward her new family dynamic began to fester. She couldn't understand why Tommy, a boy who had only recently entered her life, received so much attention. Her mother, once attentive and loving, now seemed preoccupied with Tommy's needs. He had his own room, new toys, and a steady stream of affection, while Lily was left with hand-me-down clothes and a constant sense of being overlooked. "Mom, why do you always let Tommy get his way?" Lily asked one evening, frustration seeping into her voice. "He's not the only person in this house." Her mother looked up from the book she was reading, a tired smile playing on her lips. "Sweetheart, it's not like that. Tommy just needs a little extra attention right now. You'll always be my little girl." But Lily didn't feel like her mother's little girl anymore. She felt like she had been replaced, like Tommy's arrival had shifted everything. Her world had gone from being a place of warmth and safety to one filled with jealousy, competition, and quiet resentment. Richard, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to Lily's growing discontent. He tried to include her in activities, offering her advice and encouragement, but Lily didn't want his words. They were hollow, meaningless attempts to bridge a gap that had grown too wide. The more he tried to connect with her, the more she pushed him away. "Mom, can we just go out like we used to? Just the two of us?" Lily asked one night. "I miss it." Her mother paused, her eyes softening with understanding. But then the phone rang, and just like that, the moment was gone. Tommy needed something. Lily knew what would come next. Her mother's attention would shift once again, and Lily would be left standing alone in the background. As Lily entered her teenage years, the tension between her and her family reached a boiling point. Her mother's obsession with Tommy grew stronger, and Lily, now in high school, felt increasingly isolated. She had friends, but they never seemed to understand the depth of her pain. They didn't know what it was like to watch the woman who had once been her entire world now focus on someone else. One evening, after a particularly heated argument between her mother and Richard about Tommy's behavior, Lily snapped. "I'm done," she said, slamming her bedroom door. "You always put him first, and I'm just supposed to be fine with it." Her mother tried to calm her down, but it was too late. The years of quiet resentment had built up to this point. Lily felt as though her emotions had been bottled up for too long, and now there was no turning back. The weeks following Lily's outburst were marked by an unsettling silence. She kept to herself more than ever, retreating into the confines of her room where the world felt more manageable. Her mother seemed hurt, but Lily couldn't bring herself to apologize. It wasn't just about Tommy anymore. It was about everything that had changed. Her father was gone, and she didn't know where her place in the world was anymore. She felt like a forgotten ghost in her own home. It was a quiet Sunday morning. The smell of pancakes filled the house, and the rhythmic sound of the frying pan tapping against the stove echoed in the kitchen. Lily, 6 years old, was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, clutching a stuffed bear to her chest as she stared at the television screen. The glow of the screen painted her small face in a dim light, but her mind was far from the cartoons playing in front of her. She was waiting for the familiar sound of her father's voice, the one that called her into the kitchen whenever breakfast was ready. Every Sunday, like clockwork, he would make pancakes. Lily adored these mornings. Her father would always make silly faces with the batter, turning their breakfast into a playful game. It was one of the few moments when everything in the world felt perfect and unshakable. Lily could never have known that this morning would be different. Her father's cheerful voice echoed from the kitchen. "Lily, come on, sweetie, the pancakes are ready. And don't forget, we're having fun faces today." Lily's heart skipped in excitement. She stood up quickly, her bare feet pattering across the wooden floor as she rushed to the kitchen. But as she entered, something was off. Her father was standing there, his back turned to her, holding a spatula in one hand. He seemed distant, his posture a little straighter than usual. The joyful energy of the room felt muted, as if it had been replaced by an unspoken tension. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Lily asked, her voice faltering. She couldn't pinpoint why, but something didn't feel right. Her father turned around, his face pale, his lips pressed into a tight line. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and then, without warning, he staggered, his body swaying as he dropped the spatula with a sharp clatter. Lily watched in horror as he collapsed to the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Her heart hammered in her chest. "Mom! Mom!" Lily screamed, rushing to her father's side, her small hands trembling. But the words she uttered were lost in the panic that overwhelmed her mind. She didn't understand what was happening, only that her father was no longer moving. Her mother appeared in the doorway, her face drained of color, her eyes wide with fear. She rushed to her husband's side, but Lily could only watch as her mother's hands trembled while dialing the phone. The ambulance. The urgency in her mother's voice was drowned out by the growing silence in Lily's ears. She didn't know it then, but this moment, this sudden terrifying shift, was going to define her entire life. Lily's father never woke up. The days that followed blurred together. There was a funeral, but Lily's mind couldn't grasp the finality of it. She saw people, relatives, neighbors, whispering around her, their faces full of pity, but none of their words ever made sense. In the midst of her confusion, she sought comfort in the small things, her stuffed bear, the old tree in their yard, the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. She longed for the normalcy she once had, but it was gone. Her father was gone. Her mother tried to comfort her, but Lily could see the change in her. Her once warm smile was now a hollow shell, replaced with a distant, grief-stricken expression. The woman who had once been her rock was now a fragile figure, struggling to keep herself together. But no matter how much Lily reached out, she couldn't find her way back into the safety of her mother's arms. The distance between them only seemed to grow with each passing day. And in the quiet, Lily's world shifted. Her father's absence was like a gaping hole in her heart, and she couldn't see any way to fill it. A year passed, and slowly, Lily's world began to adjust. Her mother, though still grieving, decided it was time to move forward. A few months later, she met Richard, a kind man in his early 30s with a steady job and a smile that always seemed to hide something deeper. Lily wasn't sure what it was, but something about Richard made her feel uneasy. He wasn't her father, and though her mother encouraged her to give him a chance, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that he would never replace the man she had lost. At first, it was subtle. Richard would visit for dinner, bring flowers, and try to make small talk with Lily. But it was different than the ease her father had shared with her. Richard was distant, unsure of how to relate to the young girl who had lost her world.